after you've completed the asset portion, then you can come over and complete the liabilities. And liabilities is just another word for debt. So on this side of the balance sheet, you're just going to include all of your debts. Now the first portion is the current liabilities. And something to keep in mind is if you have an asset on this side, the corresponding debt should go directly opposite. So what I mean is let's say you have an asset down here, that debt most likely in most all cases wouldn't go up here. They should correspond. So for your liquid assets, if there's corresponding debts, they should be over here under the current liabilities. This would be the area that you would include your credit cards. This would include operating lines or lines of credit that you may have down at the feed store or a fertilizer plant for seed or fertilizer. You would also use this section to include your income tax and Social Security or your real estate taxes and property taxes that would be due over the next year. Now, if you have questions about that, we can help you find where that information would be at or how you could obtain access to it. And don't get too hung up on this because depending on the complexity of the credit, that determines the level of information that we need in those sections. Another common question that I get is, what is accrued interest? Do I really need to include that? And I just encourage you, ask your loan officer, but don't worry about it. What it is we're just trying to make sure that if you have payments coming up over the next year, that we have the cash or the liquid funds available to take care of those payments. That's what those blanks are for. But again, your loan officer or your credit analyst would help you complete that portion. So once you get done with your current liabilities, you would move then down to your intermediate liabilities. And again, these are due in the next 1 to 10 years, and they would correspond with assets on the other side of the balance sheet. So here we have someone that had owner finance cattle, and even if the debt isn't reported to the credit bureau, but you owe it, you should include it on your financial statement. So we're just asking, list the lender, what the collateral is, the reprice date, and that would be if you had a loan that was on an adjustable rate and it was set to reprice or mature possibly at another date in the future. You might list that here. List the rate and then what the payment expectations are. Now for this guy who had an owner financed, he had interest only payments, and then we just list the balance over here. Now go on and remember, when you're listing the collateral may be all machinery, but it's helpful for you and I both. Maybe just list what the loan was for. That way, if I have a question, I can call and say, what about that loan on that rake? Where are you at on that? And remember, of course, that if you're filling out a balance sheet and you're including your FCS debts, that your loan officer can help you come up with those balances, or if you need help remembering what your rate was, they'd be happy to help you find that information. As you move down, you'll find the long-term liabilities. And most likely, this section would be associated with real estate. So you would just include the lender, what the collateral was. It's the same information that you included above, and then what the balance of the loan is. The main idea is just make sure that you've included all of your debts. And if it's not exactly in the right place, we can work with you to move it around as needed. If you had a lease, you would put that down here under leasing obligations. You would put who the lease was through, and this would be like a machinery or an equipment lease. And then you would put the amount that would be due in 12 months and the total unpaid balance. Now, if you have a pasture or a crop land, a real estate lease, that wouldn't go here. This would just be for vehicles or equipment. Once you complete the balance sheet, there's some questions at the bottom that we would like for you to answer. And for example, are there any judgments against you? Just mark yes or no, and then explain on the side any yes answers. So, if this would be if, a judgment of a court had placed a judgment against you, you would just mark yes and then put an explanation to the side. The next question is, have you been a debtor in a bankruptcy in the last 10 years? Are you party to a lawsuit? Are any of your taxes delinquent or under dispute? Are you obligated as a cosigner or guarantor on any other obligation? And this is a question that I receive a lot of questions about.
And all that means is, for example, if you had co-signed or guaranteed a note for a son or a grandson or a neighbor, it's just asking if you hadn't considered that debt yours, but you're still responsible, mark yes, and then just provide a little explanation. The final question is an important one. Does anyone else own an interest in the property listed on the balance sheet? And a lot of times we don't think about the interest that perhaps a trust or another entity may have. Perhaps someone has set up a trust and now the trust owns all of their assets, so they're not actually owned personally, and that would be a case where we need to mark yes or list what specific assets the trust owns. Or perhaps you farm with a family member and they have a 50% interest in this real estate. That's where you would need to mark yes and then explain that you farm with your brother and they have a 50% interest. Once you're all done and you've reviewed it, and just make sure you haven't left anything out, just date and sign at the bottom. And then that's just telling me that you completed it and that it's an accurate picture as of today. So remember, once you're done, just review it and make sure that all of your assets and all of your debts are listed. Don't get too worried about the boxes, and if you have any questions at all, always feel free to contact your local FCS office. Go to our website and find the office closest to you. You can find that on our homepage by clicking on the Locations tab. Or you can always call 1-800-444-FARM, and we'd be so glad to help you.